Hello and welcome to the European Report. In this programme today we are discussing the impact of President Obama's re-election for another 4 years in office and what that means for Europe, and certainly what does that mean for European foreign policy towards Israel and the Middle East. We'll also be discussing the escalation in conflict in Gaza, plus also the Syrian attempts to draw Israel into a wider conflict with a civil war in Syria, and also be discussing the ramifications of a Palestinian declaration of independence at the United Nations later this month. To join me in this programme today, I'm joined by Tomas Sandell, the Executive Director of the European Coalition for Israel, MEP Sari Essayah from the Finnish Christian Democrat Party in Finland, and David Saranga from the Israeli Embassy, head of the EU mission to the European Parliament. Hello and welcome to the European Report.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to start off with you, Thomas. Can you just give us an update of the work that has been carried out by ECI in the past month? I know that you've got a very important conference you're organising in the next couple of days. Can you explain about the conference and how some of our viewers who are interested in the work of ECI can get involved?
Great. Well, tomorrow we will have our 9th annual policy conference here in the European Parliament, meaning of course that we had our first event in 2004. And like always, this is the high point of the year when we bring together members of European Parliament, Israeli diplomats, and our leaders from across Europe to look at the issues of the day. And obviously many of the same questions that we are discussing here will be discussed also here in the European Parliament tomorrow. So it is an important day. And but let me also say that in 2 weeks' time we will go to New York again, to United Nations, during a week which may be one of those moments in history that we will look back and remember, because the 29th of November declaration of a Palestinian state is scheduled to happen at the United Nations. Of course, it's a bit more complicated than saying a declaration of a Palestinian state, but the implications would mean that the Palestinian authorities could be regarded as a state and not as a non-state actor anymore. So obviously with all of these events within just 2 weeks, this is an important time in the activities of ECI. And those who want to get involved can go simply to our website, or if you Google European Coalition for Israel, or if you go ec4i.org, you can sign up for a newsletter and you can learn a lot more about other activities that we do throughout the year.
Superb. What I like about your initiative is it's a European-wide initiative, so people from all over Europe, Christians from all over Europe can get involved with the project, certainly get involved in the work, and the more people get involved the better, isn't it?
Thank you. Yes.
It's a pleasure. And David, it's good to have you back on the European Report.
My pleasure.
I interviewed you a couple of months ago. David, can you just give us an update about the EU mission here to the European Parliament, some of the initiatives that you've been involved in, and also a bit more about your work so our viewers can understand the true nature of what you're doing here in the European Parliament on behalf of the State of Israel?
Our main goal is to promote Israel in the European Parliament. People think that Israel has only few members here in the European Parliament, which is not true. We have a big number of friends here in the Parliament, and one of the examples is what happened last month after this Parliament approved the ACA agreement between Israel and the European Union, an agreement which was frozen for more than 2 years, but with our friends here, we succeeded to bring it to vote, and in plenary it had a huge majority, really a huge majority, people from the left and people from the right, from the center, people from all political groups supported this agreement, which shows that Israel really has friends here in the Parliament. So that's one of our missions. The second mission is to see how Israel can be relevant to the activity of different MEPs, and I'll explain myself. Israel is cutting edge in innovation, in medicine, in science, in technology, and these issues are relevant for Europe. We all know that innovation is the engine for Europe's growth, for the economy growth. And Israel can share its experience with the European Union, with this House, and bring our experience. So there are a lot of points where we find ourselves on the same ground with the members of Parliament.
Superb. And sorry, I have to welcome you back again to the European Report. So it's great to have you back on the programme. Firstly, because of your athletics background, I have to ask you, what did you make of the London Olympics back in August?
It was great games. As a spectator, I was enjoying very much many of those great world records which were done during the games, and also that it seems that everyone was enjoying so much and was having the joy of sport, which should be always in the Olympics. And well, there are people who are saying that best game ever, maybe.
But certainly the Brits are anyway. I
Yeah,
think that more
yeah.
has to do with the number of gold medals you won rather than anything else. But it's a great experience to enjoy the Olympics.
Really.
David, probably the biggest news this month to occur has been the re-election of President Obama for another 4 years in office. In terms of his policies towards Israel, do you think that there will be a change? Because there was a real stark contrast between him and Mitt Romney, his Republican challenger, when it came to the issue of Israel and Israeli security.
I perceive it a bit different. I don't think that there is a difference between Mitt Romney or Obama when it comes to the policy in the Middle East. I don't think there is any difference when it comes to Israel. The support for Israel in the US is bipartisan. And I think this is one of the most important strategic points which we can say. The fact that both Democrats and Republicans support Israel, this is something which is really, really important. So coming back to the policy of both candidates, I don't see much difference. First. Second, let's see what happened in the last 4 years. The relationship between Israel and the US has never been so strong, has never been so deep as in the last years. Let's see the important topics. Iran, for example. There is no difference between how Israel or the US perceive this threat of Iran. And if there are differences, if the differences exist, it's only on several points on the margin. Both sides understand, for example, that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. And President Obama said it loud and clear. He will not accept Iran having a nuclear capacity. So coming back to your question, I think that the support for Israel, which is bipartisan, is an important value of the relations between the two people.
Yeah. But to pick on your point there has been a source of conflict really between your Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Obama. And it's known that their relationship is not particularly great, and he certainly favoured Mitt Romney as president. Do you think that will actually have a bearing on Israel's relationship with the United States?
I'm sure that the relationship between Israel and the United States will continue being as excellent as it's been in the past. I don't think that in the future, I don't think that President Obama will change its policy. On the contrary, I'm sure that President Obama, when he looks today on the Middle East, he understands, like he understood in the past, that the only democracy, the only state in the region he can trust, he can rely on, is Israel. Israel is an island of stability in the Middle East. And therefore, and since we share the same values, I don't see any change in the policy of President Obama in the future.
Yeah. And Tomas, I really want to bring you on into this equation. What's your interpretation of President Obama's re-election for another 4 years, and what do you think that means for Israel and Israeli security?
Well, generally speaking, of course, I can agree with David what he is saying, that there is a bipartisan consensus on the general points of support for Israel. Nevertheless, I would take the liberty of being perhaps a bit more pessimistic, and not so much necessarily going back and see what did Obama do wrong during the last 4 years. I've said it before on this program. I don't think it was helpful to not to receive the Israeli Prime Minister in a prominent way when he came to Washington. I don't think his speech in Cairo was very helpful in understanding the dynamics of the Middle East. And I think it did open a Pandora's box, which we see some of the ramifications today. Nevertheless, I always do stress this, even when we compare with the European nations. Looking at the United Nations in particular, I think Obama has been, his support has been unwavering when it comes to the Palestinian statehood bid. My only observation now has to do, of course, with the next 4 years. And I would think, cynical perhaps as I am, that once you are a first-term president, you want to get re-elected, you have to play your cards pretty wisely. You don't want to alienate, particular groups in the constituency. If we want to see the worst scenario, of course, it means that you have 4 years without any limitations. You cannot be re-elected for a third time, and this means that you can pursue your policy objectives without much interference by the US Congress. Obviously, he will have to work together with the Congress, but I think that the next 4 years will be slightly different than the previous 4. I hope, of course, and I'm sure we agree with David and with Sari, that it will be different for the better. But I also have my slight, hesitations.
And sorry, I'd say the majority of probably MEPs here in the European Parliament, together with the EU member states, very much welcome an Obama victory and another 4 years of President Obama. What do you believe the implications are of American foreign policy and its impact upon policies towards Israel and the Middle East from the European Parliament and the European Commission?
Well, I quite much agree what David already said, that there are probably not going to be very big changes with his policy now for the next 4 years. And of course, I hope that too. For example, when you mentioned the differences between Obama and Romney, many political commentators say that, for example, the American Jews were choosing between these two guys only because of their domestic policy. And it was only the growth, the economical situation, unemployment, those issues were on their agenda when they were thinking that which one to vote. And so maybe the foreign policy is not that big issue in US than it's for us here in Europe and what is in Middle East and especially in Israel. And that's something that we also have to keep in mind, that in US policy, the foreign policy is not that big deal than it is here. But of course we are hoping that Obama will go on with his support to Israel and also will have his line in UN when it comes to the Palestinian bid, and also that he would be cautious with Iran. Benjamin Netanyahu's speech in UN was excellent, and he was really waking up us all that what is going to be maybe the worst scenario for the world.
Okay, I think it's a wait-and-see policy really, but in terms of President Obama's new administration teams, in terms of who's going to be his Secretary of State, who's going to be the Defense Secretary, but we can see really that he has shifted his policies prior to that of the Bush administration closer to that of the European position, which takes a more hostile, even approach to the conflict. But when it comes down, in recent months, we've seen here in the European Parliament an increase in hostility towards Israel, particularly towards Jewish settlers and Israeli produce produced in Judea and Samaria. We've also seen a growing delegitimization of Israel and calls by the European Union to stop the expansion of Jewish homes in Jerusalem. Why is the EU taking a hostile position, particularly in light of settlements in Jerusalem?
Well, it depends about the issue. As David already said, that with the ACA agreement, there was a majority to support it. And it was great to see from left to right that MEPs were supporting this agreement, and they understood that this is not only for Israel, but this is for European patients, that it's going to give better medicines, better pharmaceutical products to Europeans. And this kind of cooperation we should have. And we should have more of this kind of cooperation with Israel. But when it comes to the Palestinian issue, I think that there is lack of information, there is lack of knowledge of history, what's in the background of this crisis. I think that these are probably the main issues, and we need programs like this which are telling that what is actually happening in the area, what are the reasons, why are we here in this situation today, and what can we do for the peace in Middle East.
Sorry, don't you think there's a oversimplification on behalf of Europe when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? There's an obsession
Surely.
with the Palestinian issue, and this tends to ignore the other issues that are happening in the region, particularly the lack of education, the lack of economic opportunities for ordinary Arabs living in the almost fallen states as we see in the Middle East. There's been very little condemnation by the EU on what's happening in Syria. We've got the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood coming to power in Egypt with devastating consequences for freedom of speech and for minorities, including Jews and Christians living in Egypt, as well as moderate Muslims as well. Do you believe that Europe needs to look at this more strategically and look at the region as a whole instead of separating the Israeli-Palestinian issue out for main focus?
Certainly, Israel is the only democracy in the area, and so of course we should understand that if they are following the European Judeo-Christian values, which country should be that we should be supporting here, and we should see the situation as a whole, understand that what is the Iran's position now, what they are probably going to make in the area, what is the Syria conflict, how it's going to escalate, how much it's going to threaten all the other countries on the area, and also that what's going to happen in Egypt and what consequences it might have for the peace treaty, and also in Jordan. All these situations we should keep in mind and understand the picture as a whole, not only focus on one issue and have our demand list that you should follow this demand list. First of all, we should have these two parties in the same negotiation table and to see that how they could deal with this peace treaty issue, and after that if we can somehow help to gain the peace, there I think that the European position should be.
Yeah. And David, this really kind of brings us into the question and the status of Jerusalem. We know that Jerusalem is the undivided capital, not only of Israel but also of the Jewish people worldwide, and yet the EU takes a more hostile approach, and particularly the expansion of Jewish homes in the city, and doesn't even recognise and wants to divide Jerusalem between East and West Jerusalem, when really it's a united city united by Jews and Arabs, and it's impossible to divide the city of Jerusalem. How important do you think it is to convey that message here in the European Parliament?
This is the message. Jerusalem is undivided, period. Jerusalem will not be divided. We are willing to negotiate with the citizens, the Palestinian citizens in the area of Jerusalem, what can be done in order to address also their requests. But Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, Jerusalem is the capital of the Jewish state, and as is, it will remain. But at the same time, and Sari mentioned it, we are willing to sit and negotiate with the Palestinians. I'm not talking now about Jerusalem, I'm talking now about the larger picture. The only way, and history shows us, that the only way to solve the problems in our region is to sit around the negotiation table and to talk, and to talk, and to talk. And unfortunately, since Netanyahu entered to office, the Palestinians are refusing to sit and to negotiate. Moreover, the only prime minister ever who frees the settlements, to the building of new settlements, is Netanyahu for 10 months, and he paid political price for it. And it didn't make the Palestinians to come again and to sit around and to talk. This is what we are asking. You know, sometimes the European Union is asking Israel, you know, you are the stronger, do something. But you need two to tango. We can't sit with ourselves and negotiate about the future of the Palestinians. We need them to be with us. And around the table of negotiation, let them raise whatever they want to raise.
Yeah. And also want to discuss with you, which has been a real success story, the EU-Israel trade agreement. And certainly it's been hard work on behalf of the Israeli government, the Israeli Foreign Ministry, to get that agreement in place. How significant do you believe this agreement is?
The agreement which was approved last month, the ACA agreement, is important because first it shows that there is no blockade in the relationship between Israel and Europe. It shows Europeans that Israel is important for the benefit of the Europeans. Of course, it's important for us as well, but it's both ways. First. Second, there are few other agreements which are in process. And I'm almost sure, that the fact that this agreement passed and the fact that this agreement is for the benefit of the European citizens, so the people in this house will understand that it's not only about politics, it's also about a common or a mutual interest between both sides. I think it's the interest of the European citizens to get cheaper medicine with higher quality with one of the largest manufacturers of medicine in the world, Israel. I think it's the interest of the European citizens to get the Israeli technology, to get the Israeli science, to learn from Israel, and vice versa. So therefore, if we are talking about political issues, it's important to keep also the dialogue on other issues as well.
And I just want to bring you here into this discussion, Thomas. Doesn't this illustrate the importance of Christians getting involved, working with MEPs, lobbying MEPs and being a voice for Israel here in the European Parliament, and really shows that more Christians across Europe need to do more of this?
Well, I have to be a bit modest when it comes to the passing of this agreement. I would not say that it had necessarily very much to do with ECI, more with the work of David and the mission and foreign ministry. But nevertheless, of course, it makes a difference in a continent where the Jewish population, of course, is rather small. I believe this is where Jewish communities should be able to count on the Christians to come alongside. And this is, of course, how we always refer to ourselves as a European Coalition for Israel, as a coalition of all the others. And it goes back to the speech of Elie Wiesel, where he said, well, why is it that it's always we as Jews that have to defend our own interest? Where are all the others? So I believe that the Jewish state should be able to expect this of us, and I believe this is something that we should expect out of ourselves. When it comes to this particular trade agreement, I know that there was a petition signed or passed around to members of parliament where ECI played a role together with Jewish NGOs in Brussels. And again, I believe this is a very good way of working together. We can reach people sometimes that the Jewish organizations may be less inclined to reach because of faith issues. And I hope, and it's really our objectives to step up this work in Brussels now in the next years.
Oh, excellent. And sorry, how important and vital is it that viewers watching this programme get behind very brave and courageous MEPs like yourself, who are willing to put yourself on the line and defend Israel here in the European Parliament?
It is very important because, as David said in the beginning, there are not so many friends of Israel in this house, and we have to defend our position and also tell the true story of Israel. As I said before, that there are people who don't even know the history. They have the lack of knowledge of history, and that's why we need MEPs who are telling that what's going on in the Middle East and how we as a European, how we can promote the area, how we can help those people who are living there, and how we can promote the peace process, what we can do for that. I think that it's vitally important, and also the support which is coming from viewers, letters, emails, postcards, those are all needed. Thank you.
And David, we've seen over the last couple of years alarming increase in the whole industry known as the boycott, divestments and sanctions against Israel. The primary purpose is to delegitimise the state of Israel. I mean, in the UK, for example, we've got one of our biggest supermarkets, fifth biggest supermarket in Britain, called the Co-op, who are deciding to boycott Israeli produce produced in the West Bank or Judea and Samaria. How is the Israeli mission here in the EU responding to that challenge? And also, doesn't these boycotts also hurt Palestinian farmers as well that are employed by Israeli firms?
The issue of boycotting of BDS, what is called, is an orchestrated effort from the side of the Palestinians to attack Israel not in the political field. I don't believe in it. I don't believe in it because of two reasons. First, people in Europe understand that buying Israeli goods, it means buying quality. People in Europe understand that the Israeli products are not products that you can buy anywhere. Sometimes, if you want to boycott Israel, so you have to turn off your cell phone, because in every cell phone today there is an ingredient from an Israeli technology. You have to shut down your computer. You have to stop using your GPS. You have to stop using medical devices like MRI, CT, and so on and so forth. Who can afford himself to live in such a world? So let's be serious. The world cannot afford himself to boycott Israeli products. Having said that, we are trying to promote other campaigns in order to confront the boycott campaign. For example, there are groups in Europe and in the States that launched a website which is called Boycott. In other words, people want to boycott Israel. No, we are going to go and buy Israeli products. Now, and to our supporters, I'll say something very simple. Every time you go to the supermarket, buy an Israeli good, no matter what it is, whether it's a candy, whether it's a vegetable, whether it's a fruit, buy an Israeli good once a week. First, try the quality, and then remember that you are in this action, you are going to contradict, you are going to confront what our opponents want to do.
You had a chance then to recommend Israeli hummus, you know that.
But you know, as someone who, the hummus is great, but I'm much more proud of the Israeli technology, science, and so on and so forth. But yes, you're right.
And sorry, as an MEP here in the European Parliament, I know your views on Israel are very strong. Do you sometimes have hostility from members of the public or your own constituency back in Holland for the stance you make on Israel? And how much does the boycott, divestment, sanction campaigns have a direct impact on you and your work you're doing here?
Sometimes I get nasty emails and so on, but I think that what I try to tell people, to remember that during the dark years of Europe, the whole Holocaust issue started with the boycott campaign, don't buy from Jews. Mm-hmm. And I think that this is something that we as a European, we should remember. We really should remember and understand that what are we actually talking about now when we are saying don't buy anything which is from Israel. And as a politician, I see this, it's like a street which goes to both directions, that if we are boycotting Israeli products, one day they might turn to Asia and look at their products from there, not from Europe. That would be a disaster also for Europe. So let's be serious and let's realize that how much we can benefit from each other and how much cooperation we can do.
And Thomas, how much influence do NGOs like Christian Aid and Oxfam have, particularly as many of them are actually funded by the European Union themselves, actually perpetuate the problem and the situation rather than actually resolve and bring peace between the two sides?
I want to say two things on that issue. First is that it's very sad, say that you are a member of European Parliament or an EU official, and you ask the question, well, what does the Christians think? And then here you have Christian Aid coming or all the other organizations, and you said, wow, finally I got an answer from, above. and apparently this God that they, think so highly of, he doesn't think so highly of Israel, which is very sad, And this is why we have a European Coalition for Israel, which is explicitly Christian, because we say, listen, this may have been what they told us in the 1930s and the 40s, but it cannot be the only voice. And that's why it's so important that our voice is strong and it's heard, and it would contrast what we hear from these groups which are calling for a boycott. My second thing, because I like what David was saying, we need to be proactive. See, what we did in Finland was that there was a particular large Christian aid organization that started a campaign to boycott these Israeli products from the disputed territories. So we sent a letter to our supporters and we said, well, you are potentially also donors to this Christian aid organization. I think it's in your complete democratic rights to ask questions to them. And I said, well, this is the background. These are some of the questions that you may want to ask them. And then you may want, if you feel this is right, just to say that, well, personally, I would have my questions whether this is really the right Christian aid organizations to donate to, if you make these very strange priorities. And what happened within a rather short period was that they removed the ad from the website, which was calling for a boycott. So what I'm saying also to our supporters is that sometimes they feel that they're few, they're weak, they don't have power, but I believe these organizations in particular are very sensitive to well substantiated criticism from their own constituency. If for no other reason than simply for the reason if people will vote with their money and say, well, I'd rather, donate or support this organization, which is not hostile to Israel. I think, it doesn't take long before they wake up and say, well, maybe if for no other reason, just to avoid controversy, let us just focus on doing what we should do to help people in need, not to boycott Israel.
I think Tomas did very good work with this, and because if we look at the area, Syria's issue is the most important one. I think that as an aid organization, they should focus on how they can help those people who are the most needed in the area, who need aid now, and not start some kind of boycott campaign. It was really something which was against the ideology of this whole organization, and so I'm very grateful for the Finnish Christians and for ICE, which was doing so good job with this.
And Tomas, we've seen in recent years the Methodists in Britain and also in Europe, other groups, including members of the Church of England and more the established Christian churches, actually get behind organisations like Christian Aid, Oxfam. Do you really think that there is a problem that they're focused so much on so-called Israeli brutality and oppression that they completely ignore the plight of Christian Palestinians who are suffering because of the Islamicization that's taking place within the Palestinian territories, and they're silent on this issue?
I mean, obviously you stated the problem already, that there is a discrepancy between what they point out, and we believe that, as you know, some of the definitions of anti-Semitism says that criticism of the state of Israel, which is completely disproportionate, is very close to anti-Semitism. So we believe, you are always free to criticize a country. But of all the 193 UN member states, why would you single out this one nation, so small, but still having been of such a blessing to humanity, and still today with the startup revolution, with the innovations and everything, there's something for a person who is a rational and thinking person that doesn't make sense. And I would say, instead of pointing our fingers to them, we need to take our responsibility. In particular, if we are Christians, we belong to one of the denominations, we have an obligation to raise these questions. We don't have to be hostile, aggressive, or one-sided in any way, but just raise the most obvious questions. And as Sari said, well, looking at the situation now, tens of thousands of civilians dying in Syria, where is the problem in the Middle East today? And I believe it's a golden opportunity. As long as we sit down and we discuss, we look at the facts, we read our newspapers and watch our news shows, you can't miss where the suffering is. And you can't miss to see, well, where are the perpetrators? It's surely not the only democratically elected government in the region. But the responsibility is with us, with the viewers of this program, to raise these questions directly with their leaders.
And David, I mean, Israel comes under so much international criticism from the media, from organisations like the EU, from the State Department, even the British Foreign Office when it comes to Israel's relations with the Palestinians. But the fact is, isn't it, that actually the Israelis have given the Palestinians everything, built the infrastructure, schools, hospitals, roads, and have been the only nation in the Middle East that's actually prepared them for statehood.
You know, sometimes I look at the international community, at part of the international community, and they feel as if they don't want to be confused with facts. Let's see what happened last week. Israel left the Gaza Strip in 2005. There is no Israeli presence in the Gaza Strip. We remove all settlements, all civilian, all military presence. The Palestinian terror organization of Hamas, which is controlling the Gaza Strip, started to launch missiles and rockets against Israeli territory. Today, more than 1 million citizens, Israeli citizens, are in shelter. They don't go to school, they don't go to kindergarten, they don't go to work because they are afraid of these missiles. Now, I haven't seen in the international media, I haven't seen a mass criticism of this action. Now, and I'm asking myself, why? First, media-wise, it's a great story. Civilians are being targeted by a terror organization. But I'm asking myself, how come that the international media is not covering this story? First. Second, how come that we hear only some weak condemnation from, not from all countries, only from part of the world of these actions? Now, the days when people used to gather information from one source, one media source, has gone. Today, people can be updated by other means, social media, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. Just surf the web in order to find what is the current situation. And here's my request from the audience. Don't base your information or your knowledge only on one source of information, no matter how credible is this source of information. Today, there are so many other ways to look for the truth. And the truth is there. You just have to look for it. Compare different sources and then make up your own mind about Israel.
David, can you give us an update on the situation? Because we've had dramatic developments over in the past week. I mean, we've seen over the course of last weekend over 100 missiles and rockets being fired from Gaza into southern Israel, like towns like Sderot, also reaching Ashkelon. And now we're also seeing escalation in tension between Israel and Syria and the Golan Heights, with the Syrian army firing mortars upon Israel in the Golan Heights. What is the current situation, and can you give us an update, please?
As you mentioned, right now I can say that there is one hot frontier in the south, in the area of Gaza, where more than 140 missiles and rockets were launched towards Israel, with this aim of targeting civilians. And on the other side, we saw also from the north side of Syria some attacks from the Syrian border. At the beginning, I had this impression that it's coordinated. They just want to pressure Israel from north and from south. I don't know if it's coordinated. What is important is to understand that Israel is under fire. And since Israel is under fire, Israel has to do everything and is doing everything in order to protect its citizens. We started with diplomatic talks. We continued by answering these provocations, and we will continue till we understand that that Israeli citizens are secured. We will do everything to do it in a peaceful way, but if, God forbid, we have to use our forces, we'll do it. It's the obligation, and it's also the right of the Israeli government, like any other government, to protect its citizens.
And, Thomas, as a journalist here, do you believe that false and misleading journalistic reports, because it's only really been in the response of these rocket attacks that Israel's fired into Syrian territory, also launched some attacks into Gaza, that becomes a news story? And doesn't this actually play into the hands of the terrorists when the international news agencies and journalists don't actually report on the fact that this was instigated by Hamas or instigated by the Syrian army, for example?
Absolutely, and again, it may seem like such an easy and basic principle of fair journalism, that you get the full story, or at least that you you release the story when the Israelis has not retaliated, if that would be the case. But what you see, and it would be interesting even to scientifically to study this, to see how they always wait. And it's very comfortable to say, well, let's just wait a few days. And once Israel would have to do something in defense, then the story breaks. And I don't know, and I'm sure none of us can really answer that question, well, why is it, if we wouldn't point to the tendency of being biased in media at large? But again, as David said, and I think this is so important, this is a game changer. You know, Twitter and Facebook and social media. I posted a video just 2 days ago showing how it's only 15 seconds that people have to run to the shelter. And I put in my status update, I said, well, share this with your friends because media will not. But again, you know, this is how you reach, you know, go spiral and reach hundreds of thousands, possibly millions. So I think we should capitalize more on the fact that it's not only the BBC or the Times of London who will have the whole truth. The whole truth is out there in social media, and this can become a game changer.
And sorry, when we see Israel responding to terror attacks like the rocket attacks, and having visited Sderot in southern Israel, you see a whole community traumatized by missiles, knowing they've only got like 40 seconds to find shelter, a bomb shelter, before these missiles and rockets come over. When Israel retaliates, like we saw in 2008, to defend her citizens through Operation Cast Lead, Israel becomes the centre of the news focus and news attention. What is it like for an MEP here in the European Parliament when Israel's being condemned for, say, aggressive behaviour, and does that turn others against Israel because of a lack of information and a lack of objective news reporting on the issue?
It was so important that I had the opportunity to visit Sderot. I have been telling people that when I met with the father who lost her, I think she was 7 or 8 years old, daughter, in this one missile launch, or rocket launch, and it was so deeply touching as a mother to see the grief of a father, and still in that situation he was able to explain what happened, and that he personally, he's trying to solve the problem, the grief inside his family, and try to go on the everyday life. He's not having that kind of revenge mentality. It was so touching to meet with people like he was, and I think that MEPs should have more straight information from the field. They should have a possibility to visit Israel. They should meet with the families who have lost their relatives, their family members, and to understand that what kind of situation it is when you are under a threat all the time. When you hear the siren, you know that, okay, you have less than 1 minute to go to hide yourself and your family. It's somehow very, very hard as a European to understand that what it could be for the mental health of people to go through daily these kind of issues. And so before we are condemning what Israel is doing, we should understand that what kind of situation is going on there. And also that as a European, we have double standards. We are always, when Israel is giving back, we are always condemning them. But when there are rockets coming from Gaza, there are usually no voices before, as Tomas said, before Israel is responding.
And David, how frustrating do you find it as an Israeli diplomat trying to put Israel's case forward, not only to politicians here in the European Parliament, the European Commission, but also to journalists as well, when Israel's dealing with terrorist organisations like Hamas, who in their covenant charter call for the destruction of the State of Israel, but also in their covenant charter call for the destruction of the Jewish people, call for genocide, and the same with terror groups like Hezbollah. Is there a disconnect between what Europeans think here in Europe, the liberal elite, and the realities of what's happening on the ground in Israel?
This is our main challenge, you know, to confront people with facts, to bring facts, as Sari mentioned. This is exactly our goal. How we bring the truth, how we bring reality to to the media in order to spread it to others. And the work of social media, the work of public diplomacy, the work that we are doing with the media is not easy, but at the same time you can see that it succeeds sometime to move the needle, to change some things. If in the past people used to get the information as is from one source of information, this is not the case anymore. And you know, it was interesting to see also last month when the ACA agreement was approved, there was a campaign. People bombarded the other side, Palestinians, bombarded the emails of MEPs with negative emails calling them not to approve the agreement. And we were asked to do the same by our friends, and we told them, no, we are not going to use the same methods because of two reasons. First, MEPs, like journalists or others, they understand that there is an orchestrated campaign here with a certain goal, first. Second, if I want to convince someone, I will convince him with facts. I will convince him with proofs. I will convince him with showing him what is the situation on the ground. Another example, last week we had here the IDF coordinator in the West Bank, and we asked him to meet also with MEPs who are against Israel, the people who are criticizing Israel, in order to bring the reality.
Sorry, you have to leave us now because I know that you've got a very important engagement, and I just want to thank you so much for joining us on today's programme, and made many of our viewers get in touch with you, and thank you for the excellent work that you do. It's superb. Thank you. I want to say something about Sari, so yeah. She's not here now to defend herself.
Yeah, she's not here, but it's important to say sometime to our friends thank you, because we have friends in this house, but the number of friends who are raising up their voice is limited. And therefore, Sari is one of these MEPs who is not shy, who is not afraid to raise the voice in order to support Israel and in order to say what she thinks about the Jewish state, about Israel. And therefore, I think it's important to thank our friends.
And I want to bring in another issue here, and that's plans by the Palestinian Authority to declare an independent Palestinian state at the end of November. Can you give us an update, because this is something that you've been working very, very hard and very closely on, Tomas?
Yeah, correct. I mean, the issue is rather complex, so I will have to try to simplify a little bit, because we are talking about an upgrade at the United Nations, an observer non-state member, correct? And the important significance is the word non-member state. So you can easily get it wrong. The issue is they would still be a non-member, but they would now be called a state, which could then, according to international law, have ramifications in many different ways. And of course, the Israeli government has been trying to stop this process. So have we. Two dates have been suggested for a vote at the United Nations General Assembly. The first date was the 15th November. Now it appears that it will be on the 29th of November if it's not postponed in the next 2 weeks. And I believe again it's not the final countdown, but this is something which would not bring the two parties closer together. It would not bring more stability in the region. On the contrary, it would bring more chaos. It would bring more uncertainty, more turmoil, and it would bring the parties further away from each other. So what we are trying to do, and obviously we are on the same line as the Israeli government, is to say to the UN member state, listen, wait, will this lead to peace or will it lead to further turmoil and chaos? And also from a very practical financial point of view, considering that the European Union and the United States are the de facto financiers of the Palestinian Authority, will this really give value for the money that we are putting into the situation, or will it deteriorate even further? So we will be in New York in 2 weeks' time, and we will meet again with ambassadors of member states which are still undecided. And we hope, in particular from the European Union, that there would be a convincing majority that would say a clear no, and still those who would abstain, and there would be very few who would be supportive of this bid. And David probably have a list of where all the UN member states are at the moment, but we know that this is being decided as we speak. So within the next 2 weeks, each government will have to formulate for themselves what are we going to say. I think it's correct to say that European Union will not have a united front. There will not just be one EU line, but as was the case with the UNESCO bid, that they will go in basically in 3 different directions: no, abstentions, and yes.
David, down to the last 5 minutes of the programme. The Declaration of Independence by the Palestinian Authority to try and get the UN General Assembly to recognise a Palestinian state, is this warfare by another means, certainly through diplomacy? And surely the solution here is a negotiated settlement between the two sides. What are the implications of a unilateral declaration of independence by the Palestinians for Israel's security and Israel's position?
The Oslo agreements, which we signed with the Palestinian Authority, the main pillar of the Oslo agreement is that you don't do anything unilaterally. If you want something, you have to negotiate it with the other side. At the moment, the Palestinians are changing the rules of the game is going to change. And therefore, in this case, if the Palestinian Authority is going to act unilaterally, it means, in other words, that the Oslo agreements are not valid anymore. And then it opens the area, it opens the situation to a chaos, something that we have to be very clever not to enter to this situation. Now, the reason the Palestinians want to become a non-state member is clear. It's not because it's going to improve the standard of lives in the territories. It's not because it's going to bring more investments. On the contrary, the reason they are doing it, it's in order to bash Israel in international forums, in the ICC, in The Hague, and so on and so forth. Once again, we see that the Palestinians, instead of helping themselves economically, education, and so on and so forth, they're trying to find forums in order to bash Israel. This is not something that will improve their lives. So therefore, we are against any unilateral state taken by the Palestinians.
And isn't there a great danger, Thomas, that if, for example, the Palestinians are accepted as to be a member of the International Criminal Court, that any military antagonization by Palestinian terror groups and Israel responds, then Israeli soldiers and generals could be up against the International Court in The Hague for war crimes? Isn't that one of the big dangers here, that Israel could be isolated even further in the international public opinion and the realm of international politics than they were without a Palestinian state?
Correct. And this is why Abbas is so clear, and this is a quote from him, to say that, on November 30th, if there is a vote on the 29th, Israel can no longer say that, we have a situation on the disputed territories, but there will be a confrontation with another state. And that changes, of course, the dynamics in international law completely. Of course, I think for most of our viewers, international law is not something you study every day, when you read the newspaper or your daily devotion. But it's very complex, and this is why it's so subtle, and that's why we need to be on our guard, because usually we are used to the traditional military warfare, and we know what a war is. We don't know what a diplomatic war is. And this is what ECI is trying to train our activists to say, well, we are in a new war. These are the weapons that we need to use. Our mouths, you know, words, written word, and understanding and training. Again, I want to make it clear because I realized I've said it and David said it. The correct upgrade is a observer non-member state.
That sounds complicated.
And the emphasis is on state.
Excellent. I think we're about a minute and a half left of the programme. David, can you tell us how important and vital it is that Christians get behind Israel and the Jewish people and give them that support?
We're sharing the same values. The Judeo-Christian culture is something that Europe and Israel share. What I'm asking is, whenever you think about Israel, think about your own culture. The people of Israel, the people who live in Israel, are people who are sharing the same values. They act, they think, they believe the same way you believe. So therefore, it's important first to understand it, and second, I want people here in Europe also to know that the Israeli people appreciate this friendship. It's not something we take for granted, not at all. So therefore, on behalf of the Israeli people, I really want to thank the people who support Israel here in Europe and especially the European Coalition for Israel.
Gentlemen, I just want to thank you very much for joining me for the European Report. It's a pleasure to have you back on the programme, David. And thank you very much, Thomas, as well. And I just want to thank you all for watching today's programme and to learn about the key issues that are affecting Israel here in the European Parliament and Europe. And I just want to thank you again for watching the European Report.